the things I'm going to show you in terms of format and organization, when I do these, and anybody who gets taught this, right, you'll do it so fast that you'll do it faster than if you did it the slow way, right? So here's one. I always recommend when people work an Excel workbook, the first thing that they do is, and I'll do this again, they go on the top and click on the tab that says View, and then you'll see there's a button here that says Grid Line. I always encourage that before you do anything, you go to View and you click the grid lines off. You see how the lines popped off? The reason I encourage that, and I never like ever recommending something without giving a reason, is everything you do in an Excel worksheet or an Excel workbook or any analytical context for that matter has a purpose, right? You should do everything for a reason. If I have this up on the screen, I just have lots of lines here and they don't really mean anything and it's much more difficult to read. This is cleaner, it prints a lot better, and for example, to Charles's point of having a total, if I do it like this, I can then add a border line here, over the border line, here we go. I can put a border line here on the bottom, and now the line means something, right? So turn off the grid line. Another one, which I just said, is using lines and delineation to separate groups. Yet another one is, we could put a border or a line outside this, right? So let's say we put this small line here. You know, we right click, we go to Format Cells. We could put a thicker line for the border around the outside, and now we have a little bit of contrast, right? So that looks better too. Another thing that we could do that I encourage is, you could organize and colorize the top, right? So whenever in Excel you have things that are letters, best practice in like most style manuals is you orient it to the left. So if you click back on Home, you could orient it to the left. Another best practice is, if you click, everyone knows about clicking on rows and columns. If you click in the very upper left, you select the entire Excel worksheet. You can click on this button above the center button. This middle aligns everything. That may seem kind of silly, but the reason for doing that is, so if you have rows that are of different size, it centers everything in the middle across the rows. What else? Another thing that we could do is we could colorize the top so the headers jump out more. I like to pick relatively neutral colors or beam colors like green or blue, so I would shade this as green. And then use a vibrant color at the top. So again, best practice is to put it in something like white and bold. Things that are centered across headers always should be centered. Again, I could use a border between these, like a white border, so that you can see the contrast between them. And now we have a very nice looking table, right? And maybe I'll even put a little bit of a border around that. Finally, you'll note that when Claire made her point, I summed up the totals like she suggested, and I put these in italics. Percentages by best practice should always be in italics, and the only thing that's left is dollar signs. So a rule of thumb for formatting dollar signs is you always format dollar signs in currency. So you go to Format Cells. On the Number tab, you go to Currency. You put the negative numbers option on parentheses for any negative numbers because that's best practice. And then you take the decimal points to 0. The reason for this is significant figures. So if you're looking at dollars, unless someone specifically requests it, you probably don't want cents. And the reason to do it as dollars is so everything aligns neatly. Now, one other thing is, again, why do we do it? It's so you can tell where you are in the data. A final best practice is, if you have a dollar delineated value, you should only have it delineated at the top of a data set and for the total. So for the other values that are here, I would select these as well and go to Format Cells, and you see where it says symbol here and there's a dollar. I switch this to none and click 0. So now you see I have a beautifully formatted table, and there's only a dollar sign at the top and the bottom. If Giles, Claire, Megan, anybody sent this over to me, I could take one look at this piece of data and I would understand everything. But there's one more thing we haven't mentioned, and that is one of my biggest pet peeves, which is hard coding. You'll see that here, I've just inserted 5,900 as a value. The problem with that is, obviously for this very simple sheet that we have here, we can look at these 6 values and tell that this is an addition of what's here, right? But let's say you had a much bigger worksheet and there were 1,000 different values and there were all kinds of summations. This is really not helpful, and if you all of a sudden change one of these values to 1,400, your total is going to be wrong. So you should never hard code data. You should only hard code assumptions. So what I would do is change this to a sum formula, sum all the values, and now I have a table that makes sense and is not hard coded. Last thing, and again, now I'll go through the entire list for you, but I wanted to do this to kind of whet your appetite. You use color to inform what you're doing in the workbook. So, in Excel, anything that's a label other than the header row is in black. But for numbers, there are very special conventions. If something is in black, black constitutes a formula. So these are calculations, they're formulas, we keep that in black. But something that is an assumption is always put in blue. Blue denotes the fact that it's a guess. This goes back to accounting traditions when something in black is something that is, final, and something in blue is something that is temporary. So I would put this in blue. Now, someone can immediately pick up this workbook, they can tell how it's organized, they can tell what the categorization is. They know what the total percentages are, which aids in understanding the details, to Claire's point. We might have footnotes at the bottom to give detail on what deal size means. And now they know if I want to change something in this workbook, I should play around with only these 5 values. Not this, not this, not this, and not the percentage values. Any questions, and does that resonate with people as why is that important, even though it might seem kind of tedious?
Yep.
Cool. All right, so now let's really